The wind moves through the Appalachian hollows like something breathing, in and out, carrying with it the scent of pine and decay, and secrets buried in soil that has never been turned. In the winter of 1905, when the snow fell silent and heavy on the mountains of western North Carolina, there was a homestead in a valley so remote that maps didn't bother marking it, a place where the Harper family had lived for 3 generations, raising children and crops in isolation, so complete that weeks could pass without another human voice reaching their ears. The house sat against the mountain like it had grown there, weathered wood the color of storm clouds, stone chimney built from creek rocks, windows that caught the last light of day and held it longer than seemed natural. 17 people lived in that house, 3 generations spanning from old Samuel Harper, aged 74, down to baby Grace, just 8 months old, and on the morning of January 9, 1905, every single one of them was gone. Not fled, not murdered, not taken by force or natural disaster. Simply gone, as if the earth had opened and swallowed them whole, as if they had stepped through a door that closed behind them and never opened again. The beds were still warm when neighbors found them. The food was still on the table, a breakfast half-eaten, steam rising from coffee cups, bread broken but not finished. And in the silence of that abandoned house, in the weight of that unexplained absence, there lingered something that made grown men uncomfortable. A feeling that this was not tragedy but transgression, not disappearance but transformation, as if the Harper family hadn't left at all but had simply stopped being in a way that the human mind struggles to comprehend. Welcome to this channel. Today we step into a case that is not just difficult to understand, it reshapes the meaning of fear itself. Like the video, subscribe to this channel and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? The Harper family had settled in what locals called Whisper Hollow in 1857, when Samuel Harper's father, Josiah, claimed 400 acres of mountain land and built the first cabin on the site that would become the family compound. The Harpers were known throughout the scattered settlements of the region as peculiar folk, not unfriendly but distant, not hostile but separate, existing in their valley with a self-sufficiency that bordered on complete isolation. They grew their own food, made their own clothes, educated their own children, buried their own dead in a family cemetery on a rise above the house, and had minimal contact with the outside world beyond occasional trips to the trading post in Asheville, 30 miles away over roads that were barely paths. Samuel Harper, who became the patriarch after his father's death in 1898, maintained this tradition of isolation with what neighbors described as religious fervor. A letter written by a traveling preacher who visited the hollow in 1900 survives in the archives of the Asheville Historical Society. Reverend Martin Thorne wrote to his bishop on May 14, 1900, describing an encounter that disturbed him profoundly. "I came upon the Harper homestead while ministering to scattered souls in the mountain regions," he wrote. "I was received with courtesy but clear reluctance." The family, numbering some 14 individuals at that time, assembled to hear me preach, but their attention seemed divided, as if they were listening to something else beneath my words, some other message I could not hear. When I spoke of salvation through Christ, old Samuel interrupted to say that salvation was not given but earned through understanding, through seeing what lies beneath the surface of things, through accepting truths that the church has deliberately obscured. I attempted to correct this heresy, but he smiled with a patience that suggested he pitied my ignorance rather than feared my authority. The rest of the family watched this exchange with identical expressions, a strange uniformity of features and manner that suggested not just family resemblance but something deeper, as if they shared not just blood but singular purpose. I left troubled, and have recommended that more Orthodox ministers visit to counteract whatever unorthodox beliefs are taking root in that isolated place. No Orthodox minister ever made that visit. The Harper family was left to develop their beliefs in complete isolation, and those beliefs, whatever they were, would play a crucial role in their eventual disappearance. In 1903, A surveyor working for the railroad company passed through Whisper Hollow and spent a night at the Harper homestead, paying for lodging with cash and conversation. His diary, discovered in 1962 among his effects and donated to Appalachian State University, contains observations that provide rare insight into the family's daily life and strange practices. The surveyor, a man named Charles Pemberton, wrote on August 7, 1903, "The Harper family is the most peculiar I have encountered in 20 years of mountain travel. They live comfortably but simply, their house clean and well-maintained, their fields productive despite the rocky soil. But there is an atmosphere about the place that I cannot adequately describe. They move in coordination that seems choreographed, as if each person knows exactly where the others will be at any moment. Conversation is minimal, and when they do speak, they often finish each other's sentences or speak in unison without appearing to realize they're doing so. In the evening, the entire family gathered in the main room, and I assumed for Bible reading or prayer. Instead, they sat in complete silence for nearly an hour, eyes closed, barely breathing, so still that I began to feel like an intruder witnessing something sacred and private. When the hour ended, they opened their eyes simultaneously and resumed normal activity as if nothing unusual had occurred. I asked Samuel what the silence was for. He said they were listening. I asked to what. He said to the underneath. I did not inquire further. The family structure in 1905 included Samuel and his wife Martha, their 4 adult children with their spouses, and 9 grandchildren ranging from teenagers to infants. They lived in a house that had been expanded over decades to accommodate the growing family, a rambling structure with additions built in different styles as needs arose, creating a building that seemed to have grown organically rather than been constructed according to plan. Neighbors who had visited the property over the years reported that the house's interior was disorienting, with rooms that seemed to lead into each other in ways that defied the external dimensions, with hallways that felt longer inside than the building's width could accommodate, with windows that showed views of the valley from angles that shouldn't have been possible given their position in the structure. One neighbor, a farmer named Hiram Stone, testified in the investigation that followed the disappearance that he had delivered supplies to the Harper homestead in December of 1904, just weeks before the family vanished. His testimony, recorded in county records, describes an experience that left him vowing never to return. I brought them flour and salt they'd ordered from town, Stone stated. Samuel invited me in for coffee, which was unusual as they rarely invited outsiders past the threshold. I sat in their main room and noticed immediately that something was wrong with the space. The room's proportions seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at the walls, expanding and contracting like breathing. I thought perhaps I was ill, dizzy from the cold ride. But then I realized the entire family was watching me, all 14 of them visible from where I sat, and they were all perfectly still, not moving, not blinking, just watching with expressions of intense curiosity, as if I were an animal in a cage rather than a guest in their home. Samuel asked me questions about the outside world, about the town, about whether people there were happy, about whether they felt complete. I didn't understand the question. He said most people live on the surface of things, never sensing the depth beneath, never knowing that the world has layers, that reality is thicker than it appears. I finished my coffee quickly and left. The ride home, I kept feeling like I was being followed, though the road behind me was empty. If you're still listening, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to this channel, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? The final weeks of the Harper family's existence in the observable world were marked by increased isolation, even by their standards. The family made no trips to town in December of 1904 or early January of 1905. Their last contact with the outside world was a letter sent by Samuel Harper to a cousin in Virginia, dated December 28, 1904. The letter was preserved by the cousin's family and eventually provided to investigators. It read, "Dear Cousin Edmund, I write to inform you that the Harper family will soon be undertaking a journey from which we do not expect to return in any form that you would recognize. We have spent 3 generations preparing for this transition, studying the old knowledge that our ancestors brought from across the ocean, knowledge that the modern world has forgotten or deliberately suppressed. We have learned that the world contains more dimensions than the 3 we perceive, that consciousness is not bound to flesh, that families who maintain sufficient unity of purpose can transcend the limitations of individual existence and merge into something greater. Tonight, we complete the final ritual. By the time you receive this letter, we will have crossed over into the underneath, into the layer of reality that exists beneath the surface world, where the family can exist as one entity, undivided, eternal, free from the suffering and separation that defines mortal life. Do not mourn us. We go willingly, joyfully into integration. Your cousin, Samuel Harper. The cousin, Edmund Harper, would later testify that he thought the letter was the product of mental breakdown and immediately contacted authorities in North Carolina. But his letter did not reach the county sheriff until January 15th, 6 days after the family was discovered missing. The discovery occurred on the morning of January 9th. A neighbor, the same Hiram Stone who had visited in December, rode to the Harper homestead to check on the family after noticing no smoke from their chimney for 2 days, unusual during the coldest part of winter. He found the front door unlocked, the house warm from a fire that was still burning in the hearth, and signs of recent habitation everywhere. In the kitchen, the table was set for breakfast, with food still on plates, coffee in cups, a pot of porridge cooling on the stove. Upstairs, beds were unmade as if people had just risen from them. Clothes hung on hooks, personal items sat on dressers, children's toys lay scattered on floors. But of the 17 people who had lived there was no sign. Stone searched the entire property, the house, the barn, the outbuildings, the family cemetery, calling out names and receiving no answer. He found tracks in the snow leading from the house toward the tree line, but the tracks were strange. They appeared to be from bare feet despite the freezing temperature, and they overlapped in ways that suggested multiple people walking in exactly the same footprints, one set of prints bearing the weight of many. Stone followed these tracks into the woods until they simply ended at a clearing about 300 yards from the house, ended not at any obstacle or terrain change but simply stopped, as if those making them had been lifted into the air or had ceased to exist. Stone rode immediately to alert other neighbors, and within hours, a search party of 20 men was combing the mountain looking for the missing family. They found nothing. No bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle, no indication of where 17 people could have gone. The county sheriff, a man named Robert Blackwell, was summoned and arrived with deputies on January 10th. His official report, filed in the county courthouse and still available to researchers, documents a scene that defied rational explanation. "I have investigated disappearances before," Sheriff Blackwell wrote, "but never anything of this nature. The Harvey homestead shows every sign of normal habitation up to the moment of disappearance. Food was being prepared and consumed. Morning chores were underway. And then at some point, the entire family simply stopped what they were doing and walked out into the winter morning without coats, without shoes, and vanished. The tracks we found support witness Stone's description. They are too few for 17 individuals, and they end without explanation. I have ordered a thorough search of the surrounding area, but I fear we will find nothing. This is not a case of flight or abduction. This is something else entirely. Something I lack the experience or perhaps the imagination to properly understand." The search continued for 2 weeks, expanding to include volunteers from surrounding counties and even a team of Cherokee trackers brought in by a concerned judge who had heard about the case. The Cherokee trackers, according to newspaper accounts from the period, examined the site and refused to continue the search after the first day. The eldest tracker, whose name was recorded only as John, told the sheriff through an interpreter that the land around the Harper house was wrong, that it had been changed by something the family had done, that the boundary between this world and other worlds had been thinned to the point of breaking, and that whatever had happened to the Harper family was not something the living should investigate too closely. The house remained untouched for weeks as the investigation continued, and during that time, strange reports began to emerge from people who ventured near the property. Multiple witnesses described hearing sounds coming from the empty house, not the creaks and groans of an abandoned building, but voices, many voices speaking in unison, a low rhythmic chanting in a language no one recognized. Others reported seeing lights moving through the rooms at night despite the house being secured and empty. One witness, a teenage boy named Thomas Gray, claimed he saw figures standing at the windows, figures that looked like the Harper family, all standing in perfect rows, all facing outward, all with their mouths open as if singing, though no sound reached him outside. When he approached to investigate, the figures vanished simultaneously, and he felt, he said, a pulling sensation, as if something inside the house was trying to draw him in through the glass. He ran and refused to return. In February of 1905, the house was officially searched by investigators looking for any clues that might have been missed. They found, hidden in a cellar beneath the kitchen that had not been noticed in previous searches, a room that would deepen the mystery rather than solve it. The cellar room was accessible only through a trapdoor concealed under a rug, and inside, the search party found what appeared to be a ceremonial space. The walls were covered in drawings, intricate geometric patterns that hurt to look at for extended periods, designs that seemed to shift and move when viewed peripherally. There were candles, hundreds of them, arranged in circular patterns on the floor. There were books, old leather-bound volumes written in languages that the local schoolteacher, brought in to examine them, could not identify, though he suggested they might be corrupted versions of Latin, Gaelic, and something older, possibly pre-Christian European languages. And in the center of the room was a large circular symbol painted on the floor in what analysis would later confirm was human blood. 17 handprints arranged around the circle's perimeter, pressed into the paint when it was still wet, each print labeled with a name, every member of the Harper family represented. If you're still listening, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to this channel, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? The books were confiscated and sent to theologians and academics for analysis. Of the 7 volumes found, only 3 survived to the present day, the others having been destroyed in a fire at the courthouse in 1932 that many locals believed was deliberately set to eliminate evidence of the Harper case. The surviving volumes were examined in 1976 by a professor of religious studies at Duke University who published a paper on their contents. According to his analysis, the books described a belief system that combined elements of Celtic mysticism, Germanic paganism, and practices that might have originated in pre-Christian Appalachian indigenous cultures, all synthesized into a coherent philosophy about the nature of reality and consciousness. The central tenet, as best the professor could translate, was that individual consciousness was a curse, a fragmentation of a greater unified awareness that had existed before humans developed individual identities. Families, the texts argued, retained traces of this original unity through shared blood and shared experience, and through sufficient discipline and ritual, a family could reverse the process of individuation, merging their separate consciousnesses back into a single entity that existed outside normal space and time. The ritual to achieve this merger required multiple generations of preparation, with each generation teaching the next, building up psychic or spiritual momentum across decades, until the family reached a critical mass of unified intention. At that point, through a final ritual performed in perfect synchronization, the family could dissolve the boundaries between their individual selves and merge into what the texts called the underneath, a layer of reality that coexisted with the physical world but was not subject to its limitations. The professor concluded his analysis by noting that the Harper family appeared to have been following this practice for at least 3 generations, possibly longer, and that Samuel Harper's letter to his cousin suggested they believed they had achieved the necessary preparation and were ready to attempt the final transition. Whether they succeeded in any objective sense is unknowable, the professor wrote. Whether they genuinely merged their consciousnesses into a unified entity existing in some alternate dimension, or whether they simply died through some form of group suicide or accident that we have not yet discovered, is a question that cannot be answered through academic research. What is certain is that they believed absolutely in their goal, that they prepared for it with meticulous care, and that they vanished in a manner that defies conventional explanation. The Harper case stands as one of the most disturbing examples of what can happen when isolated communities develop belief systems untethered from mainstream reality testing, when faith in the invisible becomes strong enough to override basic survival instincts. The Harper property was eventually claimed by the county for unpaid taxes and sold at auction in 1909. The buyer, a speculator from Charlotte, planned to subdivide the land for timber operations. He visited the property once, spent 3 hours there, and never returned. He sold it immediately at a loss to another buyer who also never developed it. The property changed hands 6 times between 1909 and 1942, with no owner keeping it for more than a few years, all reporting that there was something wrong with the land, something that made it impossible to work there, impossible even to spend extended time there without experiencing profound psychological distress. The house itself stood empty and deteriorating for decades, becoming a local legend, a place that teenagers dared each other to visit, though few had the courage to enter and none stayed long. Reports of phenomena continued throughout the early 20th century. Lights in the windows, voices in the walls, the sensation of being watched from inside when standing outside. And occasionally, witnesses would claim to see the Harper family, all 17 of them, standing in the yard or walking through the trees, visible for moments before vanishing, always moving in perfect synchronization, always silent, always appearing more substantial than ghosts, as if they were somehow more real than the living people observing them. In 1953, a team of paranormal investigators from Virginia heard about the case and received permission from the current property owner to conduct a multi-day investigation. Their report, published in a now-defunct spiritualist journal, described experiences that drove 2 of the 5 team members to abandon the investigation early. They recorded audio that captured the same chanting described by earlier witnesses, multiple voices speaking in unison in an unknown language. They photographed anomalies including what appeared to be humanoid figures standing in rooms where no one was present. And on the 3rd night, according to their report, all 5 investigators experienced a shared vision or hallucination in which they found themselves surrounded by the Harper family, who welcomed them and invited them to join the underneath, to abandon their individual existences and merge into the unified consciousness that the family had become. The investigators described this invitation as intensely seductive, offering promises of ending loneliness, ending fear, ending the fundamental separation that defines individual existence. 2 investigators admitted they almost accepted, almost walked forward into the reaching arms of the Harper family, before the vision ended, and they found themselves back in the physical house, terrified and disoriented. The property was finally purchased in 1968 by the National Park Service as part of a larger land acquisition for wilderness preservation. The house was demolished in 1970 under controversial circumstances, with some locals protesting that destroying the structure would release whatever was contained within it, while others argued that the house needed to be eliminated to end the phenomena. The demolition crew reported numerous difficulties. Equipment malfunctioned repeatedly. Workers experienced vivid nightmares, and on the day the house was finally brought down, several crew members reported seeing figures standing at the tree line, watching, 17 people of various ages, there and not there simultaneously. When the demolition was complete and the debris removed, the Park Service planted trees over the site and marked it as unsuitable for trails or development. The official reason given was unstable soil. The actual reason, according to internal memos released under Freedom of Information requests in the 1990s, was that park rangers assigned to patrol the area consistently reported disturbing experiences, feelings of being followed, of hearing voices, of sometimes seeing people who shouldn't be there, people who looked like they belonged to an earlier century, people who watched but never approached, who seemed to be waiting for something. In 1987, a genealogist researching Appalachian family histories came across records of the Harper family and became obsessed with documenting their story. Julia Morrison spent 3 years tracking down descendants of the Harper line, children born to Harper cousins who had left the mountain before the main family's disappearance. She interviewed 12 individuals who carried Harper blood, and her findings, compiled in an unpublished manuscript now housed at Appalachian State University, suggested disturbing patterns. Every descendant she interviewed reported experiencing vivid dreams of a place they called the underneath, a vast dark space where they were not alone, where they felt the presence of many others, family they had never met but somehow recognized. Several described feeling a pulling sensation, a call to return to the mountains, to walk into the woods and find the place where the boundary was thin. 2 admitted they had visited the site of the former Harper homestead and had experienced what they described as a moment of temptation, a profound desire to stay, to lie down on the earth and let themselves sink into it, to join whatever was waiting below the surface. If you're still listening, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to this channel, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Morrison's manuscript included a particularly disturbing interview with a woman named Sarah Harper Collins, granddaughter of one of Samuel Harper's brothers who had moved to Tennessee in the 1880s. Sarah, interviewed in 1988 at the age of 72, described a lifetime of feeling incomplete, of sensing that part of her existed somewhere else, with people she had never met but somehow knew intimately. "I have always felt like I'm only a fragment," Sarah told Morrison. "Like my consciousness is divided, with the larger part somewhere I can't reach. Sometimes, usually at night, I feel them, my family who disappeared and they're not gone, they're together, merged into something that's more than the sum of its parts, and they're calling to the rest of us, to the descendants who escaped, asking us to come home, to complete the circle, to join them in the underneath where the family can be whole. I've resisted for 70 years, but the call gets stronger as I age, and I don't know how much longer I can refuse. Sometimes I think it would be a relief to stop being this separate, lonely thing and become part of something larger, even if that something is not quite human anymore." Sarah Harper Collins died in 1991, and according to her obituary, her body was never found. She was reported missing from her home in Knoxville, with no signs of struggle, no indication of where she had gone. A neighbor reported seeing her walking toward her car in the early morning hours, dressed in a nightgown despite the cold, moving with purpose but saying nothing. Her car was found 3 days later on a Forest Service road near the site of the old Harper homestead, doors open, keys in the ignition, no sign of Sarah herself. The Harper case gained renewed attention in 2003 when a documentary filmmaker attempted to create a comprehensive examination of the disappearance. The production was plagued with problems from the start. 2 cameramen quit after experiencing what they described as vivid nightmares about being underground, surrounded by whispering voices. The sound recordist suffered a nervous breakdown and had to be hospitalized. And the director herself, a woman named Amanda Price, became so obsessed with the case that her family staged an intervention and convinced her to abandon the project. The partial footage that was shot before the production collapsed has never been released, but according to crew members who spoke anonymously to researchers, the footage contained numerous anomalies, figures appearing in frame that weren't visible during filming. audio recordings that captured voices speaking in unison beneath the crew's conversations. And in one particularly disturbing sequence, a long tracking shot through the woods near the homestead site that, when played back, showed something following the camera from a distance, multiple figures moving between trees, keeping pace but never quite visible, always in the periphery. Modern researchers approaching the Harper case face consistent obstacles. The site itself, now part of a national wilderness area, is difficult to access legally. Park Service officials, speaking unofficially, admit they discourage visits to that particular section of the park, citing safety concerns that they won't specify. Hikers who ignore these warnings and visit the area report consistent experiences: disorientation, equipment malfunctions, the sensation of being observed by unseen watchers, and occasionally glimpses of people who shouldn't be there, who appear dressed in early 20th century clothing, who watch but never interact, who seem more interested than threatening, as if studying visitors, trying to understand why they remain separate, why they haven't joined the underneath. In 2015, a team of anthropologists from the University of North Carolina received a grant to study isolated Appalachian communities and their unique belief systems. As part of their research, they examined the Harper case, conducting interviews with locals who still remembered stories passed down through generations. One interview with an elderly woman named Margaret Stone, granddaughter of Hiram Stone who discovered the family missing, provided chilling insight. Margaret, then 93 years old, remembered her grandfather's final years, how he had become increasingly disturbed by what he had seen at the Harper homestead, how he insisted that the family hadn't died but had gone somewhere that the living couldn't follow, somewhere that still existed and still called to certain people. Granddad said he heard them sometimes, Margaret told the researchers. When the wind was right and the mountains were quiet, he'd hear singing, many voices in perfect harmony, singing without words, and he'd say that's the Harpers, that's what they became, and they're happy there, happier than we are here, split apart into separate lonely pieces. He said they found what everyone is looking for, true unity, true connection, the end of isolation. But he also said it wasn't for everyone, that you had to give up something to achieve it, had to give up yourself, your individuality, everything that makes you you, and most people aren't willing to make that trade. The Harpers were willing. They prepared for generations. And when they made the crossing, they made it complete. There's nothing left of them in this world except echoes and callings, and the places where the boundary wore thin from their rituals. If you're still listening, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to this channel, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? The anthropologist's final report, published in 2017, concluded that the Harper case represented an extreme example of what can happen when geographic isolation combines with generational transmission of alternative belief systems. The Harper family, they wrote, developed over multiple generations a complete cosmology that contradicted mainstream understanding of consciousness, identity, and the nature of reality. Whether their beliefs had any objective truth is unprovable and perhaps irrelevant. What matters is that they believed absolutely, prepared meticulously, and acted on those beliefs in a way that resulted in their disappearance from the physical world. The question of where they went, if indeed they went anywhere rather than simply dying in some manner we haven't discovered, remains open. But the persistence of phenomena associated with their former homestead, the consistency of reports across more than a century, suggests that something remains, some residue of their presence or belief, or whatever transformation they underwent. The Harper case challenges our comfortable assumptions about the boundaries of reality and the limits of human consciousness. It suggests that belief, when held with sufficient intensity by enough people over enough time, might actually affect the fabric of reality itself, creating doorways or transitions that should not exist but somehow do. In the present day, you can still hike into the area where the Harper homestead once stood, though it requires a long, difficult trek through wilderness that seems untouched by human presence. The National Park Service maintains no trails to the site, and getting there requires navigation through dense forest using coordinates and topographical maps. Those who make the journey report that the location is unnaturally quiet, with an absence of birdsong or insect sounds that is immediately noticeable. The trees grow in patterns that suggest the old foundation beneath the soil, rings of older growth marking where the house and outbuildings once stood. And there is a feeling, consistent across hundreds of visitor reports, of being observed, of standing in a place where the boundary between worlds has worn thin, where something on the other side is aware of your presence and watching with interest, possibly with invitation. Some visitors report finding objects that shouldn't be there, children's toys from the early 1900s, pieces of cloth, buttons, small personal items that appear weathered but not as weathered as century-old objects should be, as if they're being refreshed, maintained, kept present by some process that defies normal entropy. And at night, though camping is prohibited in the area, those who have stayed report phenomena that law enforcement officials take seriously enough to prosecute park regulation violators rather than investigate what they witnessed. Voices in the darkness speaking in unison, lights moving through the trees with no visible source, the sound of many people walking through the forest, coordinated footsteps moving in circles around camping sites. And sometimes, for those who stay awake through the deepest hours of night, a vision or hallucination or genuine perception of figures standing at the edge of firelight, 17 people of various ages, dressed in clothing from another century, watching, waiting, their lips moving as if speaking, though no individual voice is heard, only a collective whisper that seems to come from the earth itself, from below the surface, from the underneath, repeating one question in the language of the blood. Why do you remain separate? Why do you suffer alone? Why not join us where the family is whole and the self is forgotten and consciousness merges into something greater than any individual could achieve? Come down, come under, come home. The final truth of the Harper family disappearance may never be known with certainty. Were they victims of a mass delusion that led to their deaths through unknown means? Were they pioneers who successfully transcended the limitations of individual existence and found some alternate mode of being? Are they dead, truly gone, their phenomena nothing but the projections of suggestible witnesses primed by a compelling story? Or are they, as their letter suggested, somewhere beneath the surface of the world, existing as a unified consciousness in a layer of reality that coexists with ours but operates by different rules, watching the separate suffering world above them and calling to those with the blood and the willingness to join them? The evidence supports no conclusion definitively. The house where they performed their final ritual is gone. The books that detailed their beliefs are mostly destroyed. The witnesses who knew them firsthand are all dead. What remains is pattern, consistency of report across generations. Phenomena that refuse to stop even after a century has passed, suggesting that something is still present in that hollow, something that remembers being 17 people and is now something else, something that achieved what it sought or believes it did, which in terms of its effect on reality may amount to the same thing. The Harper case poses a question that goes beyond their individual fate and touches on fundamental issues of consciousness, belief, and the malleability of reality itself. If enough people believe something impossible strongly enough, if they prepare for generations, if they commit completely to an alternate understanding of existence, can they make it real? Can consciousness reshape reality through pure conviction? Can families merge into something beyond individual identity? Can the world contain more layers than we perceive, accessible to those willing to give up everything that defines them as separate beings? These are the questions that the Harper family's midnight disappearance forces us to confront. These are the uncertainties that their case introduces into our comfortable assumptions about how the world works. And perhaps most disturbing of all is the possibility that they're still there, not dead but transformed, not gone but relocated to a dimension that shares space with ours, but operates by rules we don't understand. And they're waiting, calling through the thin places in the boundary, reaching out to descendants and visitors, and anyone sensitive enough to hear their invitation, offering escape from the loneliness of individual existence, offering unity and connection and the end of separation. But at a cost that most humans are not willing to pay, the complete dissolution of the self, the merging into something larger that may be transcendent or may be annihilation. And we have no way of knowing which until we cross that boundary ourselves, until we accept their invitation and step down into the underneath. Where 17 people went on a winter morning in 1905, and from which no one has ever returned to tell us whether what they found was paradise or horror or something beyond either category, something that makes both words meaningless, something that exists in the space where individual consciousness ends and collective consciousness begins, where the Harper family waits still, whole and unified, and forever calling to the fragmented world above. Asking one question through 100 years of silence: why do you choose to remain alone when you could be complete? Why do you choose separation when integration is possible? Come down, come under. Come home to the family that never ends and never changes and never suffers the terrible isolation of being only yourself, trapped in one body, one mind, one brief span of years before darkness takes you back into nothing. We offer something different. We offer forever. We offer unity. We offer the underneath. All you have to do is answer the call. All you have to do is walk into the woods on a winter morning and follow the tracks that lead nowhere visible but somewhere real, somewhere the Harper family found in 1905, and where they remain, waiting, calling, whispering through the boundaries of reality itself, promising an end to loneliness if you're willing to end yourself, promising wholeness if you're willing to fragment into something larger, promising answers to questions you didn't know you were asking. Deep in the mountain darkness where the world grows thin and families merge in consciousness, discovers that it was never meant to be singular, never meant to be trapped in individual flesh, but was always destined to return to unity, to flow back into the underneath where all separation ends and all things become one.